Welcome to Culture at Work, the podcast that explores how to maintain a strong corporate culture in a rapidly changing world. I'm your host, Tim Carroll, inviting you to learn from industry leaders on how to build an exciting culture to bring people back to the office and inspire them like never before. On today's episode, we have Marilyn McSweeney, President and CEO of the McSweeney Group. Marilyn has more than 2 decades of successful experience in providing top talent in the interior furnishings industry. Marilyn and the team at McSweeney Group have an extensive understanding of what is needed for employers and employees to achieve the mutual fit necessary for long-term success. This is going to be a great conversation. Let's get to it. Marilyn, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm really excited about this topic as it relates to culture and what candidates are looking for in the workplace. But I just want to start off right at the top and just, how's the business of recruiting and how is it post-COVID? How's it changed? And, how difficult is your job now as opposed to, as difficult as it was before?
Yeah, great question, Tim. I mean, if recruiting wasn't difficult, we wouldn't have a job, right? So, people call us because it is a challenge, but I don't think it's ever been more of a challenge than it is today. And, part of it is still the trauma of coming out of the pandemic and how that affected both companies and employees. But I think it gave particularly employees time to do a lot of self-evaluation, and many have left the industry. Many have drawn the line that they'll only work remotely, and employers aren't granting that as much as they were during the pandemic, of course. Just a lot of talent has left the industry, and candidates are having higher demands. Additionally, because of that trauma and, talks about an upcoming recession, candidates are even more gun shy to make a move because of the last in, first out rule. They're afraid that if they, make this move and then there's another cut, that they're going to be on the chopping block first. So it's made our jobs harder than ever, but ultimately we are able to prevail if we have the right value proposition from our client.
And I honestly, the ones that left may be the most sane ones of all of us. But do you see? You mentioned something there about last in, first out. This perception now that seems very counter to what it was a year ago, where the Great Resignation and everybody was leaping and jumping, and I feel the media had convinced everybody that looking for something else was the best course of action. But do you really see a pendulum shift back to candidates wanting to kind of hold what they got?
That has been stronger. I've been doing the recruiting for 25 years, and I worked in the industry prior to that. And it honestly hasn't been more difficult. And I think part of that is some of the lead economists in the country are predicting a bit of a recession in 2025, right. And people are hearing that, so they're afraid to make a move. But right after the pandemic, so many people lost their positions, so they had to look for new jobs, and they would move for something that looked more secure, particularly companies that held their own well during the pandemic and they are fast growing. Those are particularly companies that people were looking for, in addition to culture, which is kind of the number one question I'm getting these days.
And we will absolutely be touching on that. But I look, I'm fascinated by recruiters in that it's a sales position, right? But it's an interesting sales position in that I feel, and you can correct me if you feel I'm wrong, by all means, that you're selling the buyer and you're selling the seller. You're
Yes.
having to do double the work in order to get that done.
Yes. Yes, I had one of our clients say to me recently, how are you surviving in this pandemic because you have no inventory to sell? And it took me a minute to realize what he was talking about. But,
Right.
it's a lot of people have left the industry, like we discussed, and a lot of the good ones are making so much money that, it's hard to get them to start over again. But again, we do always prevail. It's just taking us, twice as long as it did before in most cases.
Right. Well, now you you said the word culture, so we're going to dive in. And I ask this question to everybody: how do you define culture?
Great question. And I promise if you ask 10 people that, you're going to somewhat get different
No
answers.
doubt.
But since we talk about it every day and we ask a lot of probing questions with both the hiring companies and the candidates, the way that I would define it is that it's the company's vision and core values. It's the attitudes and behaviors that make up that work environment. It's the experience that people have while they're at work. Um, they're looking for healthy work environments as a category under culture. So, how the space looks and is it paying attention to workplace well-being and, a safe place to work. It just shows that the employers care about their employees and they're willing to invest in them. So, when you asked me to do this, I thought hard and I spoke with my team, and these seem to be the collective words that I think I would use to define a company culture.
You mentioned vision and core values, and I'm very curious. Do you find, now we're talking specific to the commercial interiors business, do you find, and peripheral businesses that I'm sure you work with, do you find that most companies, in fact, do have defined vision and core values and mission, or is that uh, uh, kind of at a premium? Is that some? Not many people have that. Which is it?
Yeah. The larger corporations are the ones that, of course, seem to have a clear mission statement. It's posted in the lobby. They talk about their core values in their meetings and so forth. But you're right, a lot of companies just haven't clearly defined that. When you open a company's website because you're about to research them as a potential employer, one of the first things you need to see is what is the company's mission, purpose, and core values. And if it's not there, I would encourage you to spend some time outlining it because it is part of the culture that a candidate will see and determine whether that fits with their personal goals. The
It's a
smaller
fun
companies
exercise
in
too.
particular, yeah, don't seem to put much time into this.
Yeah, and it's a fun exercise. It really is. I mean, at Working Spaces, we've gone through that process and defined mission and vision and values, and specifically around that values proposition. What do you find is important? And that exercise in itself is engaging and interesting to just tackle with your team, I find. And I also, as well, Marilyn, find that candidates respond to the fact that we have all of that very defined and upfront on our website. When you go there, I feel like you really get a chance to sense who we are. And so that's why I ask, is that kind of normal? Or I mean, the big companies, the manufacturers, I feel like they follow in line, but is that the same across the board for some of, let's just say, like the dealers?
Yeah, there's particularly some of the smaller or younger dealers. They're the ones that kind of rarely have that clearly defined in their website, their social media, and and within your own company. Because one of the worst things you can do where you're going to lose candidates is portray this mission and culture and values, and then what's happening inside those doors is completely different than what you're portraying. So
That big
it's
switch.
not as common to see this as we would like it to be.
So what are the two? So again, speaking of culture, what are the two requests? What are the two things, if you had to pick two, that candidates are really requesting when they talk to you relative to culture?
Mm-hmm. Um, boy, I made a list, and it's really hard to whittle that down to two. But one of the things that, especially in the last few years, is the purpose of the work, if that makes sense. It's the company's why, if you will. They want to feel like they're with a company that their efforts matter, um, not just to themselves or to the employer, but it helps the community in some way. It helps the end users feel that, the employees at your end users feel that you've invested in them by having a purpose of work, philanthropic efforts, and just like you have a reason to be there, I would say, is number one that has particularly shifted over the years. Um, and I would say almost the number one when we ask candidates what their must haves as it relates to company culture, it is the lack of micromanagement that inevitably comes up in every ask. So I would ask employers to do some self-evaluation and poll their team. And if they're getting some feedback that they feel like they're micromanaged versus giving clear expectations, um, it and results, then you're going to have, well, we're probably not going to take you on as a client, but you're going to have a really difficult time hiring. So, no micromanagement and purpose of work, would be my top two answers.
So, I generally ask that question. It's an easy, simple question in an interview. How do you like to be managed? And it's funny, almost exclusively, the first thing they say is, well, I don't like to be micromanaged.
Mm-hmm.
I would say, I've never had anybody answer that question with, I love to be micromanaged. I love it. So I think that is true. I think that's a big thing. Do you find that purpose? So I read a statistic once that certain generations, generationally, especially Gen Z, and that purpose is their big driver. It's not chasing the almighty dollar. It's, do they find purpose in what they're working? Do you, in fact, in your, anecdotally, do you find that to be generational as well?
I do. Definitely. I don't hear much of that talk of purpose of work and work-life balance and self-care and all of that vocabulary that we're hearing these days. I don't hear that coming out of the baby boomers. It is especially prevalent with millennials. This new generation that's coming in, Gen A, is not as much like that. So I would say, and certainly not to disrespect the millennials in any way, they bring a lot of value, and we need them. But they are the generation that is asking for these things, good, bad, or indifferent.
Yeah, and you have to look. We're in an interesting time, and you have to kind of answer the bell for every generation. It's a wide range of generations in the workforce today, right?
Yes. I read an article recently that there are actually five generations in the workplace right now. And I initially thought, well, that's not true. And then as you read the article, you can see where they're coming from. But, for the most part, we've got Gen A, millennials, and still baby boomers in the workforce.
Shifting to kind of employers, what are you seeing employers providing their candidates to attract, retain their employees? What are they providing relative to culture? What are you seeing more and more in from your clients that they want to hang out there for people to see and say, this is why you should want to come to our company?
Mm-hmm. And boy, that could be a podcast all in itself.
Yeah.
But I would say what I mentioned previously about your external brand aligning with what's truly happening in your office. If there's a real disconnect there, you are most likely not going to be able to retain your employees. Um, Having a commitment to workplace well-being. In fact, I just wrote an article on this that will be coming out in November's publication of Office Insight and Viewpoint about about addressing physical, mental, financial, and social well-being in the workforce. It's not just physical that we're talking about. So if you get a chance to read that article, it'll go into more detail there. But your brand aligning, workplace well-being, leadership that leads by example and with empathy and truly investing in helping them to be the most successful they can be with a lack of self-importance. Um, Additional perks that some companies have had to do to attract talent are things like having a gym at the office or, at least a few pieces of exercise equipment, having a daycare for their employees, philanthropic engagement, just kind of those unique value proposition ideas that will cause your employees, when they get approached for another job, they're not just looking at the money. They're like, well, this new company doesn't provide a gym or daycare, and that's a huge value to me. So even if it's a little bit more money, I'm going to stay where I am. Not only does that literally help you with your time and expenses, but it's also just that feeling that your company cares about you. So,
Do you find, because I'd say 10 to 15 years ago, there was this big push to, Googlefy the office. There was, you got to have ping pong tables and putting greens and kegerators and all of that stuff. Today, do you hear anybody asking for those things?
I do actually. I mean,
Yeah.
it was bigger 15 years ago when some of these tech companies, the Googles and Amazons and so forth, were almost going overboard with that stuff. I mean, I've heard from people that work there that some of that doesn't get used, so it might be just a cost to the company that doesn't translate into a value for someone. But,
What are they looking for then?
particularly,
If they're like those things, what are they looking for?
I think on their breaks, honestly, that exercise equipment or a walking desk, if you will, just so you can save time with your exercise that you would have to do at home otherwise. Um, Gosh, a lot of this just comes down to the culture of feeling respected and cared about. So it can just even be things like making sure that your company is very philanthropic and giving back.
Mm.
The younger generations especially want to see that offered in the workplace. The daycare obviously is huge, and most companies I think do charge for that, but at a minimal cost. And with your availability, like on your lunch hour, for example, to stop in and see your child, that is a huge perk. Now, not every company is big enough to warrant something like that.
Right.
But, if you're a $500 million dealership and you do have the resources in the space, that would be one thing I would encourage you to look at.
I get everything you're saying. It goes back to purpose and well-being, right? It
Yep.
just seems like there's a little through line happening here in this conversation of purpose and well-being. Okay, we're going to break away for just a quick message, and we'll be right back after this. At Working Spaces, we do much more than just sell furniture. We immerse ourselves in the culture of each and every client, and then create spaces that inspire creativity, inspire productivity, and inspire connectivity. So if you're looking to create an office space that inspires your employees to want to come back to the office, collaborate face-to-face, and do their best work every day, contact Working Spaces. Working Spaces, the innovative leader in office furniture and design since 1999. Now in 6 markets nationwide. Welcome back to Culture at Work. What role we touched on a little bit, but what role does space play in a candidate's decision, the actual physical space? What role does that play in the decision-making process?
In our industry, especially, I would say a lot in capital letters with an exclamation point. A lot of us have come from design backgrounds and so forth, or, even the salespeople that don't have a design background, or the leaders. You've been around a lot of beautiful spaces if you're selling commercial office interiors of any variety, and it's really just expected. I have honestly had candidates not take a position because when they went into the office, it was old and chaotic, and there's papers everywhere, and still using chairs from the 1960s. Believe it or not, that still exists in some places, and you're going to have a hard time, particularly attracting talent in this industry, without having a beautiful, organized, decluttered, beautiful workspace. It just shows that your employer cares about you, and also you need to have it like that because of customer visits. Your customers are going to want to come in and touch and feel what they're spending money on, and you've just got to have a beautiful workplace.
Well, if you can't get your own space right, how is anybody going to expect you to get someone else's, right?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. It's an example of your work.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Of what you can do for them.
So let's dive in. You talk about each one of these questions, to your point, is probably worthy of a podcast all on its own. But
exactly.
This one definitely is, but we'll try to cram it in here today. But work from home versus the office.
Mm-hmm.
In our industry, I'll just say I don't think we as an industry have put a premium on this enough, this conversation around how important the office is. Because quite frankly, if we don't believe in it, why in the world would anybody else? But nonetheless, I've been trying to scream that for many months, many years. But what are you seeing? Again, you're in a kind of a very different circle than let's just say I'm running in, as far as how important is it? What's our thoughts? What's our beliefs? What are you seeing? What are the candidates saying? And it may be counter to what I believe, which is absolutely okay. But what are you seeing? I'm a very open-ended question. What are you seeing as it relates to your candidates and your employer clients relative to work from home versus the office?
Mm-hmm. Boy, I don't know if there's another topic that is more hot than this very issue. And, I find people on opposite ends of the spectrum, people in the middle, but it's almost always a question that a candidate asks us when we are presenting an opportunity to them. It's more about flexible hours than totally working from home. They just, especially if you're a parent of young children, they're willing to work 40 plus hours a week, but a company that trusts them to get their work done on a flexible schedule is, I would say, the number one request. As far as fully working from home, and we especially find this request with designers more than any other niche in this industry. And a lot of that is they found during the pandemic that they can get a lot more work done if you cut the commute and you cut the office distractions. But you're right. We are in the office furniture industry. So if everybody wants to work from home, you're not going to have a job pretty soon. We are selling and designing commercial office space, and you need to be an example of that and be in the office. What I'm finding in general is I would say the vast majority of our clients, whether they want to or not, is they're providing a hybrid schedule. And the most common is 3 days in the office and 2 days at home. Now, some employees don't take that. They want to be in the office 5 days a week or 4 days a week, but they have the option to work from home 1 or 2 days a week. That will typically satisfy most people. But gosh, it is a hot topic. I really wish I could get more people to say they'll be in the office. And, if you're a salesperson, of course, you're not in the office 40 hours a week. But for those of you that are willing to do that, you're going to have a lot easier time finding a job, quite honestly. Employers want you in the office, not because of micromanagement, but you can't have company culture if you're working from home.
Amen.
So, you need that human interaction and working collaboratively and, grab somebody and go sit down in the conference room and collaborate. It's just much more likely to happen if you're physically in the workspace. So I am really encouraging candidates to evaluate that and try to mentally be willing and look forward to being in the office a minimum of 3 days a week and preferably 4 or 5.
So, and I've said it before on this podcast. I'll say it again because of your role and what you do. And again, see what your thoughts are on this topic. But I have found that when your presence is no longer necessary in the office, you open up your role to be in competition with the rest of the world. The whole world becomes your competition. They no longer see that role having to sit in that town. Therefore, instead of interviewing for a job with 20 candidates, you're interviewing for a job with 2,000 candidates because everybody's interviewing for it because anybody anywhere can do that job. Have you seen these remote jobs start to increase in number of candidates?
That is a great question. I completely agree with you that if you're never in the office, you start to become invisible, and the company doesn't see your value as much anymore, and they just realize that you're indispensable or that you are dispensable. Because you're essentially working remotely and you're probably in the same city as your employer, they realize that they could get somebody even better that lives clear across the country or even in another country, which I'm seeing, particularly South America, South and Central America. They can get less expensive and more qualified talent, and it doesn't matter where they sit as long as they can adapt to the time zone. So you really are setting yourself up to be dispensable if you are if you're a ghost, quite honestly.
Yeah, and I feel and I believe that we're heading to a place where um, we're going to see people getting promoted that are in the office, and those that are working remotely wondering why they're not getting the opportunity to be promoted, right? And it's a simple equation, right? The more you're there, the more you get a chance to, let's just say, quote unquote, get it, right? And you're there and you understand the company and you get to have those micro moments throughout the day that really kind of inform who the company is, right?
I couldn't agree more. As a company, as a management team sits behind closed doors and determines who they're going to promote and where people fit in the org chart, you're going to be much more top of mind if you're physically present and interacting with these people every day and they can see your energy, your passion, your drive, your kindness. I mean, absolutely, those people in the office are going to get looked at first. Um, they are physically there building relationships with the leadership team and with the staff. They are seen as a contributor. So I will really warn people that are fully remote, if you're looking to grow with your company or even with another company, you have to be seen.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So, final question here, um, and a good one, big one. I think everybody's going to love to hear what you have to say on this. But what advice would you give candidates and employers regarding searching or building culture?
I would say that open communication, open and honest communication, nothing in any relationship will ever trump that. Just make sure that your goals and expectations are in alignment and that you understand each other's must-haves. Even in the interview, you should try to get clear answers about what the must-haves are for this person to come and fully engage with a company with an expectation of that being for the long haul. Um, so just have those conversations and uh, the old, what they say about assumptions. So that's where I often, will speak with a candidate, for example, or a client for that matter, and they're complaining about something in their office that is causing them to either consider terminating that employee or if you're on the other side, leaving that. And I'll say, have you sat down with leadership and discussed this and make sure that you're on the same page, that you have some clear direction on how to get to your next goals. And inevitably people say, well, no, I haven't spoken with them. That's just ludicrous. Even if you're an employer, if somebody appears to not be working out, communicate and find out why. Are they getting the tools that they need? Understand how they learn and be able to help train them in the way that they learn. I just had a circumstance of this a couple of months ago. A company was going to let a designer go. And I said, have you asked her what she needs? It might be a real simple fix. And, maybe partner with someone else on the team who's successful in that job in a mentor type capacity. And they said, well, we hadn't really thought of that. So they did it, they worked it out, and now she's doing much better. So, um, you know, clear purpose and expectations and goals that you both agree on. I would say quarterly performance evaluations to make sure that once again we're not straying off that trail of what they originally came to work for. Um, everyone wants to feel important. So, give them a responsibility that really matters to your company, where they feel valued and that their input is heard and listened to, and it's making a difference. So some of this is the same type of advice you'd find in marriage counseling, for example, or relationship um, advice. So that's what I would say is, be open and honest and kind and empathetic and have these tough conversations and get on the same page.
Wow. I mean, communication, so inexpensive, so critical, and so hard to do sometimes.
It
Uh,
is. It is.
that is a great point. Well, Marilyn McSweeney, thank you so much for being with us on this episode. You are on the front lines of culture building from the candidate side, and just your insights have been great. So thank you so much for being with us today.
It's an absolute honor to be asked, and hopefully there's something here that will help someone.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
All right. Have a great day.